Hi, everyone. This is Professor Fernandez, and we're here to talk about Raymond Carver's Popular Mechanics. It's a short, dangerously short piece, but it packs a lot of punch here. And one of the things that it may be confusing or may be difficult to understand is what is going on here. We get this short scene, really, of the couple fighting, and they're going back and forth. We don't know what happened before. We don't know what happens after. We don't know what led to this fight. We only know that there's a fight and there is a conclusion of one way, shape, or form at the end. And so, one of the things you need to consider and think about is the form that this particular writer is writing about, of writing in. They are writing in a form called minimalist. So you may have heard about minimalist and maybe the minimalist movement that has been going on for a while, where you just use what you need or you just write what you need. And so Raymond Carver here is only giving you just enough information to tell you what he wants to say. He is in 100% control of this narrative, 100% control of what's going on here and what you are seeing. He is leading you up to conclusions, but letting you, the reader, dive over the cliff. Now, whether you want to dive over the cliff on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, or the center is completely up to you. He allows you, the reader, to make these choices on your own, but he leads you to it, much like a horse to water, right? He can't make you drink, but he can lead you to water. So let's go through it. I'm going to go through this and look at the setting, since we are looking at setting this week. So I will mention some things maybe in character for character and maybe the other elements of fiction, but I'm specifically going to focus on setting. All right, lots to see. There's lots of setting here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here and I'm going to bring up a copy of the story here. So this is a copy that I have for my summer classes, my classes during the semester. Same story. I think it's the copy is a little bit better. It doesn't slide to the right. Either way, it's the same thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this and what we're seeing here. So whenever we're looking at a piece, we're always going to want to look at like the title. The title is Popular Mechanics. All right. So one thing that is interesting about this title and that you need to know about this title and of course this piece is that this piece has been titled something else in the past. I'm trying to remember if it was before or after this. I think this is the final title to this. The original title, I think, was Little Things. This is Popular Mechanics. The same story with a little bit of change, not a lot of change, a little bit of change, but it's the exact same story. Now, Popular Mechanics, we're looking at this in 1981, so let me give you some context here. In 81 and before, like in what you guys would call the olden days, there was this magazine called Popular Mechanics, and it was for people who like to know how things worked, right? How does an airplane work? How does a radio work? If you were to take apart a vacuum cleaner, these were the pieces that are there, and this is the basic construction of a vacuum cleaner. So it's literally about how things work, how things are torn apart and maybe put back together, maybe in a different way, maybe not in a different way, maybe the same way, but kind of the inside workings of things. And so when we're looking at this title, think about why Raymond Chandler would name this after a magazine and really a concept of people looking at individual things and seeing how they work together to make a bigger thing. Okay. So let's look at the first paragraph here, because the first paragraph here talks a lot about your setting. As a reminder, there's the micro and macro setting, right? The big thing, where does this take place? And then the smaller things, um, what are the rules of the world? How does it function? And so we get a lot of macro ideas here. We know that it was snowing and the snow melts into dirty water. We know that um, it ran down a shoulder high window that faced the backyard. So it doesn't face the front, it faces the back. So fewer people see. We know that cars were slushing outside and it was dark outside as it was dark inside too. So we see this. So this is imagery here, a little imagery here of what's going on outside. So this right here is the macro setting. And let me see if I can put a little note here for you, if it lets me, perhaps. So this is the micro setting here, and or the macro setting here. So you know, and that you're learning that this is kind of where the universe is. That this is Earth, or this is the Milky Way, right? So this is a micro setting here. And one thing about setting that you may want to consider also here, for those who adore and love literary terms, that usually when you're talking about setting, usually comes symbolism. And symbolism is when one thing um, is a symbol or stands in place of something. For example, the flag, right? The flag is a symbol for the United States. If you, excuse me, if you maybe got a class ring and you were in the band and you had a little treble clef in your on your class ring, it stands for music, right? So it's a symbol of music. And so we have some symbolism happening here. And excuse me, one of the things that's being symbolized here is really the setting, especially when it says it's getting dark outside as it is getting dark inside. So we have some symbolism as far as dark. So we have dark being symbolized here. We also have a bit of foreshadowing here. Something is about to happen. You don't know what yet, unless you've read this already. And so this is a good example of what Raymond Carver does, right? In minimalist writing. He doesn't tell you things. He kind of leads you to that conclusion. And so in order for minimalist writing to happen, especially if you're looking at setting, your literary terms, your structure, everything needs to do double duty. And this is why this story is so condensed, right? So everything is doing double duty here. And so you have symbolism and foreshadowing happening at the same time. Okay. And so let's continue on. So we know we have a character here. Is he? This is an unnamed character here. And we know that they are not the narrator. It could be a possible main character. In fact, it is a main character. Now, is it a protagonist or an antagonist? This is up for you to decide, right? As we're going through here, maybe you're thinking he's the antagonist and the wife is the protagonist, or maybe you're thinking vice versa. Um, so we have this character doing some work here. I'm going to leave that to the side because we've already talked about character. Up to you to decide on that. So we're going through here and we see another setting here. He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into a suitcase when she came through the door. And then we have this exchange. I'm glad you're leaving. She's yelling at him. There's a baby picture in the bed and she picked it up. Okay, so let's talk here about the bedroom. So here we have a micro setting, right? So the big thing was that this is happening in a house, right? The whole exchange is happening in this house with the shoulder high window facing the backyard. So it's behind closed doors, right? But the micro setting, right? What we're really going to zero in and look at is how they're traveling within this house, how they're going from one room to another, and the argument continues and escalates. So here's a micro setting. It's micro setting. It starts here in the bedroom here. So right now we don't know what the rules of the world are. We can assume though, and we have some information here that we can actually kind of assume, right? And I bet you're wondering what I'm talking about here. We know that this is an argument, and it is a drag out fight. They're not being polite here. They're not being passive aggressive. It is 100%, I'm glad you're leaving. You are a son of a bee. I'm glad you're gone, right? It is a 100% drag out fight. And so we have here the rules of the world here happening here. We also see the dismantling of a family unit. Right? So we know that this is a painful event, and we know that not only is it painful, but pain is also being given. Pain has been received, pain is being given. And so we understand here, just by the actions, just by the dialogue here, that pain is going to go back and forth. So the rules of the world is inflict as much pain as you are getting. You need to win this argument, right? So this is the micro setting here, right? I just want to make sure, let's go back because I know it's a new kind of concept. The macro setting is this house on this snowy, dreary day with the snow becoming slush. This symbolizes a darkness that's happening outside as well as inside. It's foreshadowing that something bad is about to happen. The micro so far is this bedroom where we, the reader, are picking up on this argument. What we don't know here and what minimalist writing is about is we don't know what led to this. We don't know if this started in the car. We don't know if this started in the garage. We don't know if this started at the front door. We're just now picking it up in the bedroom. The actions in the bedroom where he, the person, one of the characters, is pushing clothes into a suitcase. The action of pushing clothes or shoving clothes. He's not folding them neatly. He's not trying to put them in packing cubes. He's literally putting his clothes in a bag. I'm out. Peace out. I don't need this anymore, right? So we know that this is a fight, and we know that this is painful. She is saying some things, he is doing some things. And so the rule here in this fight is win the fight. You have given me pain, and I want to make you hurt as much as you hurt me, right? So that's the rule. That is the rule of the world. So a lot is packed in here. I want you to check this out here. A lot, it's not even a full page. It's barely like a paragraph and a couple of lines of dialogue. A lot is packed in here. All right, and go ahead and also put here, this is a character here, the she. Let's keep going, okay? So we continue on and we have this back and forth. We have some action happening here. And this is again, rule of the world. He looked at her, she wiped her eyes and stared at him before returning and leaving, going back to the living room. All right, so we have the action of wiping eyes here. And so another thing that you need to look for, another literary term, diction, which equals word choice. So she didn't just pat her eyes. She didn't just like grab a Kleenex and just kind of patted it under and in the corners, right? She wiped her eyes. This is an action of aggression, not aggression, but it's an action, is a impulse action. Um, and she stared at him. She wiped her eyes and stared at him, didn't look at him, didn't look at him with love and affection. She stared at him. And so we have another literary term. So we have foreshadowing, setting, and diction that could be used when you're talking about setting. We also have the rule of the world here. Again, we have pain, we have agony happening here, and just kind of this wound, right? She's wounded, right? We also have here the next micro setting, which is the living room. So we went from the bedroom to the living room. So what we're seeing here is that we're moving through different rooms in the house. And so because everything is doing dual action here, we need to think about why the living room? Why are we going from the bedroom? Why are we starting in the bedroom and going into the living room, right? We don't know yet. This is something for you to consider and think about. These, again, are all choices made by the writer, made by Raymond Carver. And so because he's leading you to water before you go and take a drink, before you jump off the cliff, what is he leading you? What is the thinking is leading you to think about, to consider? So they go back and forth. They have this picture of this kid right here. Actually, this picture of the kid, this baby picture, is also another symbol. It represents the actual child. And also possession. Right? And we'll talk about that here in a second, because that becomes more clear at the end. So we're reading this, and we're not doing a first reading on this. We've already read this. And so I'm just pointing some things out. So when you're reading this, you're not going to get all of these in your first read. You're going to get them in your second, third, and fourth read, right? When you go back and literally look at what they did, what the author did. So we have, so get your things and get out. Doesn't answer, fasten the suitcase, put on his coat, looked around the bedroom before turning off the light. So she turned to the living room, went back to the bedroom, right? There's another micro setting. And then went out to the living room, back to the living room. So they go back and forth from the bedroom to the living room, right? And we can almost kind of plot this out. if we were to draw a house, right? And then we have one of the characters standing in a doorway. And this is also a micro setting, right? So we have that we're following them through. Let's take a moment here and consider these micro settings. Let's consider where they all are, right? We start in the bedroom, go to the living room. And he is getting, we'll go back to the bedroom where he's getting his stuff, and then he's following her to the living room, right? So she is leading, he is following. She is standing in the doorway to the little kitchen, holding the baby. Now, and it's very, very quick, the symbol for the baby is now the actual baby, right? And so a doorway, if you ever thought about a doorway isn't so much its own thing, but it's kind of in the middle, right? It's a passage from one room to another. It's a threshold here, right? So we have this not only as a micro setting, but you also have it as a symbol. So she's holding the baby, right? And again, this is a subtle change, subtle action here. It's not a big thing, right? She's got a picture of the baby. He's like, bring that back. And so he doesn't answer. She says, get your things, get out. He doesn't answer. He zips up the suitcase, gets ready to go, looks around the bedroom before turning off the light. Then he goes into the living room, and she's in the doorway of the kitchen holding the baby. So she's in the threshold between the living room and the kitchen, right? She's crossed over, right? And now she's holding the baby. Now, here's where the fighting gets more intense. And see how with the fighting getting more intense and her being in the threshold, Raymond Carver is literally saying, all right, I'm going to ratchet up the intensity of this fight, ratchet up this, increase the stakes is what it's called. I'm increasing the stakes here, and I'm making this a symbol, because she could easily have not held the baby and just had the picture and stayed in the living room. Then there probably wouldn't be a fight, or the fight would have ended, or it would have gone another direction maybe. But because she is standing in this doorway, because she has now the baby, because they're now going into the kitchen now, we have Raymond Chandler said, I'm going to turn up the heat here. And he does. So we talk about the baby. I want the baby. Are you crazy? No, you're not touching this baby. And so we have this diction here. You also have the rules of the world playing here, right? So you have lots of things happening here. Again, Raymond Carver is fantastic at this. Minimalist writing, which means everything does double duty, triple duty, quadruple duty. So you're not touching the baby, not touching him or her. They might as well call the baby in it. You don't even have a name for the baby. You don't even know that the baby is a boy until the husband says, or the man says, I'll send someone to come by for his things, right? So you know very little about the baby. And you know that the baby is beginning to cry here. Um, and he's covered, and she covers him after when he cries. And so now you have right here this, he's turning up, he's turning up the heat again, raising the stakes. He is increasing tension. Right? And so tension is another wonderful literary term, which means that you are raising the stakes, you are making it more, you're turning up the heat essentially in the story, and you're making it more and more intense. And so you're building up to that climax of the story where the thing happens, and you're shocked by it, and then the very quick resolution. So he's increasing the tension just with the baby crying. So she's looking at the baby. He moved towards her. For God's sake, she said. She took a step into the kitchen. This step into the kitchen, now she has officially crossed into the threshold. Before, she was just in the doorway. She was like on the edge, right? She was on the boundary line. Now she crossed into the threshold. More tension here. And remember, the rules of the world are, I'm in pain, I'm going to inflict the pain because I'm going to win this argument. That's what you do. You win the argument, right? And so he says he wants the baby. She says, get out of here. And she turned and tried to hold the baby in a corner behind the stove. He came up, he reached across the stove and tightened his hands on the baby. Right? So we look at this action here, and it's very specific action. She turned and tried to hold the baby over in a corner, right? Behind the stove. He came up, reached across the stove, and tightened his hands on the baby. We don't know if the stove is on. We don't know if anything's cooking. We don't know if there's a pot there of boiling water. We know nothing. But we know that he's reaching across perhaps a dangerous situation to create another dangerous situation. Pain on pain on pain. Okay. So we go through all this and we see some description. And he doesn't have a lot of description here, but we have description of the baby, red-faced and screaming. In the scuttle, they knocked down the flower pot that hung behind the stove. All right, so this is again increasing tension. So when I say here adding sound, we don't really hear a lot of sound other than this argument, right? We maybe hear the car slushing outside because it was described to us, but we mostly are seeing things and hearing this argument. Outside of that, we're not really hearing anything until we hear the baby start crying and now screaming. So you're adding a layer of tension. So the parents are screaming and they're physically fighting. The baby is screaming at the top of his lungs. We have the darkness outside kind of coming in here. And so you have this setting just coming down like boulders on this scene here. Let's talk about the flower pot, because a lot of students will read many critical essays on Google about the flower pot being a symbol of the baby. The flower pot is the flower pot. The flower pot is not a symbol. There have been arguments made that the flower pot is a symbol for the baby because it was knocked down, and it is what will happen to perhaps will happen to the baby later on. You could make an argument for that, but the flower pot just seems like it was there, and of course it would be knocked down, right? So I'm not going to consider the flower pot a symbol, but if you wanted to make an argument for it, please do let me know. Okay, we have all these wonderful things, or not wonderful things, I should say. She's saying that you're hurting the baby. all this back and forth. And now it's slowed down. This action is slowing down. Let me go back and say what I want to say better. We have all this stuff, all this dialogue, and this dialogue is fast. And this dialogue, what's also interesting is that there's no quotation marks, and there's very little indication of who said what. There's markers that says he said or she said, so that way the reader can go back and say who said what. We know the beginning of a sentence or beginning of a dialogue is a capital letter. So it's like a paragraph, but this is all happening very fast. There's very little description. There's just enough description to know where people are facing, what the action is, how aggressive the action is, what the sound is, but there isn't really much here, but it's going very, very quick. It's one after the other, after the other, after the other. And then he slows down the action right here. And we are still in the kitchen, right? And we know now a little bit more. So he's zeroing in on this fight and then he zeroes out. Much like, almost like he did at the beginning, where he has this micro setting and he's this macro setting, then he zeroes in on the micro. Now he's going from micro to macro, a little macro, because we're looking at the kitchen, it has no light. In the near dark, he worked on her fisted fingers with one hand, and the other he gripped the screaming baby up under an arm under the shoulder, right? So we have a little bit more description of what's going on here. The darkness has now arrived. More setting here. See how setting is important? Raymond Carver right here is saying, pay attention. I'm about to make my move, right? And so they do all the things, she's screaming, and then we have here more setting, the rules of the world. She would have it, this baby. She grabbed for the baby's other arm and she caught the baby around the wrist and leaned back. And so on and so forth. And in this manner, the issue was decided, right? So we have this rule of the world here. What did I say? In an argument, what do you want to do? You want to win the argument. And they're arguing, they want to win the argument, and you want to inflict as much pain as you were given, hands down. So at the end, to inflict pain on him, she would have this baby. To win this argument, she would have this baby. So then the baby now becomes a symbol. The baby is a trophy. Whoever wins the baby wins the argument. Whoever gets to keep it. Neither of them want to lose this argument. And so Raymond Carver leads you to the very end and the last sentence, which has frustrated many a student and many a reader, trust me. In this manner, the issue was decided. So it's up to you to decide what was the issue. Is the issue who has the baby? Is the issue who's the better parent? Is the issue who wins the argument? Is the issue how the baby, whether the baby lives or dies? What is the issue being decided? And whatever you think the issue is whatever you think Raymond Carver is arguing in this story. All right, let me stop sharing here. Lots of things to think about, lots of things being done in this particular story. And I urge you to read it more than once, right? The first time you read a story, you read to understand it. You read to make sure that you understand that the pieces are there. Kind of what is the story? Tell me the story. And then the second time you read it, to make sure you understood it the first time, And then the third time you start picking it apart. And you read it several times to start picking it apart. So when you're writing and you're analyzing these pieces to put in, say, like a paper or in your storyboard, you want to be able to know what you're saying and how you're picking this apart and saying that the setting is micro and macro. And this is what the macro setting is doing. This is what the micro setting is doing. And because the setting is doing this, this is a symbol for this and a symbol for that. And this is how tension is being built. And this is how this is being built. So that's kind of what you want to do. One more word about the micro settings here, and I think it's important to point out how when we as readers get to know the protagonist and antagonist, whoever we decide they are, we meet them in the bedroom. They go from the bedroom to the living room, to the bedroom, to the living room threshold, into the kitchen. And so you want to think about kind of the symbols to those rooms. What does the bedroom symbolize? What does the living room symbolize? What does the kitchen symbolize? And so if we're looking at the title being Popular Mechanics and how he's literally saying this is how things work, or this is how things don't work, right? This is how we're taking things apart to understand how things function. Looking at the symbols, looking at those bedrooms as symbols may be helpful. All right, with that, I think I am done. I have given you more than enough to think about. Please do let me know if you have any questions. Bye.